So if you were here last month, you heard from the world's expert
Who?
on vaping, Arnaud.
Oh.
Apparently there's claps in order. There's claps in order. Arnaud from the Blink Group. I think Gary's here somewhere.
Over there.
There's Gary. Gary's here. Gary's here from the Blink Group. Represent. Thank you for coming. So Arnaud is a world expert on vaping. As you know, vaping is a hot topic. Sadly, many deaths. I think around 50 nationwide. Obviously, not good that anyone has died, but there's a lot of lessons that we learned last month about vaping, how to do it right, and the importance of offering vaping as a modality going forward, which fortunately the governor has switched his mind on and is okay on, and Massachusetts is back, so hopefully no more deaths, hopefully bad batch, but still a lot could be learned from going to CannaGather.com/November 2019, and for the great price of free, you can learn from the world expert on vaping. So I want to give a quick shout out to a couple people. As you know, we have the host committee. If you buy tickets for you and three friends, I'm not familiar with pronouncing that word, friends. You and three friends, the host committee, you get a shout out, you get a gift, currently sponsored by Jenny's Baked at Home. You get olive oil. And then also some VIPs. I want to give a shout out to Tanya Osborne. Round of applause. Women Grow, New York City. David Hess, rhymes with Tress Capital. David Hess from Tress Capital. Longtime sponsor and supporter and world traveler, but is here with us tonight. And then Chris Burgrave, who is right there, I think. It's kind of dark. There he is. Yeah, he's there. Chris Burgrave. Cannabis professor at NYU. Did I get that title right? I know I didn't, but I think it's cool. Former CMO of AB InBev, and now joining us in the wonderful world of cannabis. So thank you. And to Jenny's Baked at Home for the olive oil, the CBD-infused olive oil.
Can you make spaghetti sauce with that?
Can you make spaghetti sauce of it? Apparently the answer is yes. Apparently the answer is yes, and it is delectable. As you all know, I'm very good at cooking, so I could have answered that myself, but I'm not good at cooking. No, I don't. Can't do anything. CannaGather New York team, want to give a round of applause for everyone on here. We got some new faces. We got Louis. Louis is going back to college after a solid internship over the past couple months. And then everyone else will stay on, but this could not be done without all of you. Then also Dave in the back on the video front, and then Amber, who owes me a headshot for the website. But otherwise, thank you all for all of your help. And before we get started on the rest of the fun, join us. Thank God there's no S at the end of join. For some of you who are as OCD as I am and have been here before, join us, not joins us, join us at the after party. Thanks to Jason for hooking up. We're not going to be at Ribalta. We're going to be at Villanelle. It's half the distance, so it's 1 block. Instead of 2 blocks. And as someone who's very lazy, I'm very excited to go to Villanelle. So we'll have free appetizers and I believe discounted drinks. It could be full price drinks, I forget. But definitely free appetizers. And then also you can get your tickets for early bird January 21st. We have not announced a speaker. We'll get to that in a second. But CannaGather.com/January 2020. Cole shots. We got Mark Press. Is he going to come up or you want me to do the pitch? How's the hip feeling? Okay. Let's give him a round of applause.
Cool. It's been a month. Anyway, I think most of you probably know the 2 branches of the state's legislature Monday night approved. They each had to approve it by 3/5 vote, and it squeaked by. But they got it approved to finally take to the voters a referendum to approve adult usage in the state. And so that's exciting. At least we're beginning to move again because it couldn't get, as you know, it didn't get through the legislature, didn't miss by much. But in any event, so it's not going on the ballot until November 3rd, 2020. After that, the Cannabis Control Commission, which is in the process of being formed, which is the successor to the New Jersey Department of Health, which presently administers the medical marijuana or medical cannabis program, will then adopt appropriate regs and make calls for applications So it's still going to be a process. I can't say that the voters will absolutely approve it. The polls seem to indicate that they should, but I think there'll be those interests that will be against it and will come out and try to influence the vote. So to the extent any of you are New Jersey-based, do what you can to get the vote out and to get people excited about this. It's just time that we bring this across the finish line, and maybe that'll help provide more of an impetus to New York, where things have gotten stuck in the mud as well. But it's good news, and I'm excited about that. And let's hope it all turns out well.
Thank you. Hopefully. Next up, we have Grassi.
So yeah, just to give you a little information about Grassi & Co. We are a regional New York City-based accounting, tax, and advisory firm. We have a cannabis practice that is led by John Pelletieri and Robert Bernstein, who couldn't make it tonight. And basically, our approach is really knowing that you need more than an accountant and a tax person, right? You need more than an audit and a tax filing, especially in an industry like this that is changing so rapidly. So we really provide most of our cannabis clients with a lot of business advice, right, around structuring their business, around tax filing, sales tax, and other types of business type advisory services. So we have some information in the back room with Robert's information on it if you have any questions about your business that he can answer. Thank you for having us here and for building the excitement here in New York City. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Been working with Grassi on a project, and so far so good. So definitely check them out. And then Sunstone, we got Stu. Let's get you on up. Round of applause for Stu from Sunstone Horticulture Lighting. Thank you, sir.
Yes, hi, my name is Stuart. The company, Sunstone Horticulture Lighting. Cannabis requires a lot of light to grow. So if you're a cultivator or a home grow, you're going to need horticulture lighting. Our technology is LED, which is widely becoming the accepted practice with LED lighting. It's about 35% more efficient than the standard technology. And if you're going to grow cannabis on a large scale, the electrical cost could be very high. And LED technology is a way of saving a lot of money for the cultivator. We're located in Long Island, about an hour east from here, and we're targeting the cultivator and also hoping for home grow, because we sell smaller lights for people to grow at home. Thank you. I land you.
Thank you. Fun fact, he's redoing the lighting fixtures on the L, the whole line, so that's pretty cool. But he's also doing cannabis, so welcome to the party, Stuart. Some news, as you may have heard, I know you've all been very focused on New Jersey and New York with cannabis legalization, but apparently there's an impeachment that may or may not be happening tomorrow, and as a result, Chairman Nadler could not join us. So we wish him well, and then we hope to see him and some of his friends who we were also speaking with, that also hoping would come tonight in 2020, and we'll obviously keep you posted. Some new hemp regs signed off on by Governor Cuomo. Quick heads up, we announced in the leaflet that there were some food additive advancements, but that was actually not signed off on. That was some part of discussion from June, so apologies for the mistake there. But we hope to discuss that as part of what's going to happen in 2020, and maybe we'll even talk about it tonight. There will be a hemp summit probably in January. I think they were eyeing December, but it looks like it got pushed off to January to discuss all things hemp, bring together the farmers, some of those interest groups. So curious to see what is going to happen on that front, but definitely stay tuned. The New York State session, the legislative session, starts on the 8th of 2020, not of 2019. It may have started on the 8th of 2019, but
give or take a day.
Give or take a day. So it's soon, right? Because basically, like after tonight, you'll finish up the week, then you'll go on holiday, then it'll be New Year, and then people are gonna like come back from New Year, and then it's gonna be a week later, and it's gonna start. So basically, legislative session is basically happening tomorrow. So if you are excited and eager to get involved, it's basically tomorrow. Like, we got to get ready now. The New Jersey referendum, as Mark said, I mean, obviously, I sort of, it's a little bittersweet. I think it's very disappointing that the New Jersey legislature couldn't get their act together. That's, certain individuals, without naming names other than Senator Rice. I think it's, I think that there's, a case when I make small typos and it says 2019. But if you actually read his letter declaring the horrors of reefer madness, he misspells heroin twice with an E at the end. So why are we listening to drug policy advice from someone who literally can't spell the word heroin? So I don't know why any media hasn't pounced on it, but now that he's seemingly somewhat out of the way from the course, now it'll be in the hands of the voters to actually do the right thing. And I sympathize with some of his sentiments around the gray market and the communities of color that have been persecuted, but ultimately at the end of the day, from everything I've seen and heard from him and listened to him, that wasn't really why he was against it. So yeah, we do need to be mindful of all of that stuff, but we need to legalize it and do it the right way and not just put up a wall and say we're going to leave it to the voters to legalize it in 2 or 3 years or however long it's going to take. So a little bittersweet, as Mark said. It's good to see that progress is happening, hopefully, but it could have been done in a much better way. Speaking of progress, Michigan and Illinois, snaps for that. Hopefully we'll see what happens with the social equity side of things in Illinois, first week of January, I believe. There's sort of been one round of licenses, and then the social equity side will kick in. But we've seen it in Massachusetts, we've seen it in California, just abject failure, and hopefully Illinois proves to be a little bit better. So we'll see. And then more progress, Major League Baseball removing the ban. I think that takes into effect starting next season. So it'll be treated like alcohol. So, if you are a professional baseball player in this audience, fear not. Starting next season, you can smoke or vape or eat or do whatever. Jason's here somewhere. I think you still have a shot. Still got time, man. You never know. He's working for the Islanders now. Wrong sport, but still pro sport. So round of applause for the MLB doing the right thing. Obviously, all eyes are always on the NFL.
Are they on medical?
What was that?
Where's the MLB on medical?
Where is the MLB on medical? I am not sure. But I'm assuming that if they're treating adult use as okay, that they're sort of on board for medical, but I'll definitely need to check that. One would hope for sure. But you never know, especially considering how backwards some of these things are. But ultimately, we definitely want to see the NFL and probably the NHL as well, given the need for neuroprotection from the cannabinoid system. So for every week, Justin will send out the leaflet. If you haven't gotten it, then let me know, and we can add you to the email list. But a lot of really great information. He's really canvassing the interwebs, looking for some of the best news and information, and curating that. So he's here somewhere, and he is a resource of information. And if you don't see him in person, you can get the download via email once a week on Tuesdays. I want to give a quick shout out to some of our other sponsors, MGO and LO. MGO on the accounting side, LO on the professional services and advisory side. So again, if you are looking for an accountant, you have two really great firms who are here to support you. Wilson Elser on the legal side, as you heard from Cole Schatz. You got Cole Schatz, you got Wilson Elser. Wilson Elser is a world-class law firm, working with them on a project as well. So far, so good. Really sharp on the cannabis side of things, coast to coast. Interfaced with them in LA and got connected with them here in New York. Got a cohort here as well. I believe Ruben is here from Wilson Elser. So be sure to be on the lookout for your next counsel. Continuing with the theme of service providers, we've got MWE. MWE is here, and not just as was said previously from Grossi, not just accountants, but also business advisors. And so taking a holistic look at your business. As you may have seen, we got up to 15,000 Instagram followers who I hope are mostly real people. And Hello Convo helped us do that. So if you're looking to grow your social following, Hello Convo. And then you got Splash, who does all of our event software management. Tress Capital, both capital providers and helping you out on the incubatory side of things, getting your company off the ground. And then the Herba Verde Group, cultivators in multiple jurisdictions, hemp and THC. Soon to be multiple countries, I believe, too. They're all over the place. Coleman is here if you're interested in getting in touch with a larger scale grower and cultivator. Definitely talk to him. And thank you to the Herba Verde Group. A couple housekeeping items. We really need a new venue. I want to give a big shout out and thank you to Jonathan from the New School. As you can tell, this place is amazing. Unfortunately, we can't really afford it, even though we are, not exactly at capacity, but I'd say, 60%, 70%. There's just structural issues, both pricing and otherwise. So I've literally been looking for 3 years. Even while we were at Galvanize, I was looking for other places. If you have any suggestions for a place that seats like 250 to 300 people in Manhattan, then definitely let me know. 2020 keynote speaker sponsors. As you know, we always try to get the best of the best on stage. And we're very appreciative that the best of the best have been coming out, and we want to keep that going. And if you know anyone that we should be reaching out to, leading companies, leading advocates, leading investors, leading politicians, we want to speak with them, and all ears for suggestions. And if you know anyone that wants to support our mission of really cultivating and fostering the entrepreneurial ecosystem for the cannabis industry community here in New York, please would love to get in touch with them. If you know anyone who might be interested in attending but might not have heard of CannaGather previously, then definitely please help spread the word and talk to me about how we can work together to do that. There are some logistical improvements that we could always do. So if you have suggestions about potentially moving the time, as I said in my email, from 7 o'clock start to 6:30 or 6 o'clock, I'm totally open to feedback. I think the only reason we've done it at 7 is because we started doing it at 7, and then we're still doing it. So all ears. And I know I send a lot of emails. I did student government in college, and people still refer to me as that email guy. So if you have any suggestions on ways that I can make the emails that I send out better, more informative, more interesting and engaging, definitely let me know. And sort of consistently, I'm all ears for any and all feedback. So if you have any suggestions, things that you'd like to see, things that I should be doing, any tweaks, definitely let me know. And last but not least, as I said already, get ready for getting involved in 2020 because it's going to be really important. I think, as we'll discuss, I think we're mostly optimistic, but the contours of that and what that looks like, we want to get it done, and we want to get it done in the right way. And that's going to take all of our efforts and more to do so. So let's get ready. This is what the dates are going to look like. That's what our calendar is going to look like. I've already sent this out via email, but I can send it out again, or if you're just planning your calendar, that's what it looks like. It's the third Tuesday of the month every month, except for May, when we'll do the last Tuesday. And then, CannaGather in January of this year, January 1st, we started in New York City 6 years ago, and then New Jersey we sort of piloted a year and a half ago with pretty solid start, but obviously not there anymore. But every place else on this list has been something that's been in the works starting this year, which has been cool and exciting, but also quite interesting. So active markets, we're in New York, we're in LA, we're in Orange County, Denver, and Baltimore. If you know any folks that we should be speaking with in those markets, please let me know so that we can connect them with our market leaders. We are currently working on Detroit, the Bay Area, New Orleans, Atlanta, and Dallas. Those are sort of in the works, and we hope to get those started in Q1. And then we've sort of been off and on in Connecticut, where I think we might be quarterly, New Jersey, Philly, and DC. If Jarrett's here, I think we've been speaking with Jarrett and one other candidate potentially about Philly, but still looking for DC and New Jersey in particular. So if you know someone who wants to really, as I said, sort of spearhead and cultivate that and foster that entrepreneurial ecosystem in these markets, where it's really important, especially in DC. We have a bunch of congressional contacts. Would love to leverage those for pushing the cannabis agenda, so to speak. So that's sort of a look at CannaGather nationwide. So without further ado, quick reminder. Normally, it's not socially acceptable to take out your phones, but take out your phones, take a picture of this awesomeness. You got Senator Diane Savino. You don't have to have me in it if you don't want to. That's fine. She's more important. Take a picture of her. Write a post, send it to at least one friend, send it to your state senator, send it to your assemblyman. Better yet, tweet at NYGovCuomo. As I said last time, I found out that many politicians' offices literally have TweetDeck open. They literally have TweetDeck open on a monitor, and they're literally just reading TweetDeck. And so, as someone who hasn't really used Twitter in 3 years, I was like, oh crap, I got to use Twitter again. So what was that?
All the time.
All the time, she says, all the time. Yeah, apparently the politicians aren't necessarily going on Instagram looking at what you're up to, but Twitter makes a big impact. So tweet at the governor. He loves hearing from us. I base that off of no context or information. I just made that up. But I strongly encourage you to tweet at him and remind him that this needs to get done, and it needs to get done in the right way. Fortunately, for this conversation, it's going to be a much more upbeat one because I think he finally is on board, which we appreciate. And so without further ado, let's give a third round of applause for Senator Diane Savino.
Thank you.
Hi.
Josh.
So I know you. We've met once or twice. But the people in the audience, some of them may be your constituents. Some of them may not know you. So what's the download on Senator Diane Savino?
So I've been in the Senate now for 15 years. I came out of the labor movement. In fact, my office was right up the street. I worked for. After I worked for the city as a caseworker in the child welfare system, I became very engaged in the union that represented the workforce, and our office was on 12th and Broadway. And after I left the membership and I became a staff member at the union, then eventually the political director and the vice president of the union, I worked right up the block from here. So this is kind of like going home for me. But in 2004, I was recruited, is the word that I use, to run for Senate by former Senate Minority Leader David Patterson, who went on to become the governor of the state of New York, and he convinced me to run for Senate, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. So I've been in the Senate now for 15 years, and I got involved in the marijuana issue through personal experience. So I watched both of my parents die from lung cancer, and it was a horrible experience. And anyone who's ever watched anybody that you know who suffered, you would do anything to help them deal with the pain. And at the time, you had, my mother died in 1998. My father died in 1990. So the idea of medical marijuana was still relatively new. And you knew if you could do something for someone that you cared about, you would. So fast forward, 20 years later, almost 20 years later, I'm the member of the Senate. And Tom Duane, who was a member of the Senate, he's no longer in the Senate now, he was the sponsor of the original bill on medical marijuana. And he carried it for a couple of years, never really got any movement out of it. Dick Gottfried, who was the assembly chairperson of the health committee and the sponsor of the bill in the assembly, never moved it, really never got any leverage out of it. But Tom was leaving the Senate. And he said to me, I'm leaving, and I know you have an interest in this issue. Would you be willing to take the bill from me when I leave? And so this was 2012, and I said yes. So he left, and I reintroduced the bill in 2013. Now, I got elected in 2004. I took office in 2005, and at that point in time, you had several states that had medical programs. Colorado, California, and that quasi-world that they were in, a couple of other states. Fast forward, 7 years later, 2012, now we're up to 22 states. New York became the 23rd state to introduce a bill, and eventually I passed it the next year. But we had several years now of experience in other states looking at it, recognizing that there was some value to medical marijuana, that people could derive some pain relief or relief for other symptoms depending on the condition they had. And then you also had what was happening in Canada, Israel, the Netherlands, Ireland. So we had a lot more to draw on. So it was a very different world when I took on the issue in 2013 than it was, 10 years before when I first got elected.
Totally makes sense. And so you were the lead sponsor for the medical marijuana bill in New York State. And as you said, I think Assemblyman Gottfried, who's my assembly member, I think he's been working on it for 30 years or something?
He had carried the bill for 25 years.
25 years.
And it was, so the interesting thing for me was, so I took this piece of legislation, and when I first introduced it, I said, we now have X number of states that have marijuana programs. It is incumbent upon me to go visit those states and see what they're doing. So I went to Colorado, I went to California. Connecticut at the time was considering it. New Jersey already had medical in place. And so all of those states presented a learning experience for me and other members of the legislature as to what you should and shouldn't do, the good, the bad, and the ugly of medical marijuana. And so I kind of dragged Assemblymember Gottfried along with me because he introduced the bill more than 20 years before and never really looked at it after that, because it was always this idea that you could pass it in the Assembly in New York State, the Senate would never touch it, and so you really didn't have to do much work on it
Because it was
wasn't gonna
Republican
happen.
controlled.
Because it was Republican controlled, and plus it was never going to happen. So who cared if it reflected the reality, what was happening in medical marijuana anywhere else in the country? It wasn't going to happen. So, but I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I want to see how it really works in other places. And so I spent some time researching it and trying to come up with what was going to be the best case scenario for New York based on what we had seen in other states. And then, of course, we ran into, at the end of the legislative session in 2014, we had enough votes to move the bill out of both houses, and then the governor got involved. And he was not a big fan of medical marijuana at the time.
No comment. So
that was then, and this is now.
fortunately, times have changed. I guess is my comment. I guess what are some of the things looking back that it sounded like from what I heard that you and a few others had a really idyllic program in mind, and then what were some of the aspects of it that were arguably stripped from the final program?
So again, the governor. At the time, Andrew Cuomo was not a big believer in medical marijuana. And again, I like to say he was a product of his generation where people grew up thinking that marijuana was dangerous. And remember, the federal government every day says that marijuana is illegal for all purposes. It has no beneficial purpose under any circumstances, unlike other things that they determine which are good for you, like OxyContin. But he believed that, and so that helped at the last moment. He was insistent that if I'm going to put my name on this bill, here's the conditions I want. I want to shrink the program to no more than 5 license holders in New York State with no more than 20 dispensaries in total, in a state with 19 million people.
Do you remember what the
Originally, there was no, we did not impose.
Uncapped?
It was uncapped.
Uncapped.
Wow. So we went from uncapped to 5 licenses, no more than 4 dispensaries each, with a total of 20 dispensaries in a state. Smoking was a non-starter for him. It was it was a final condition that he said, I will not sign a bill if we allow smoking of the product in the state. You could make an argument in both ways about how smoking is not necessarily healthy in a medical program, but he was adamant about that. And he insisted on a vertically integrated model. Which also imposed strict challenges on who was going to get into the market. So we started there, and it was always okay. We could either allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good and fight for another day, or open the door and then continue to improve the program. And that's the approach that we took. So it's been 5 years, and I've spent 5 years improving this program. First, removing some of the conditions or the restrictions on conditions that the governor's office and the Department of Health insisted.
Chronic pain is added.
Chronic pain is now a qualifying condition. Adding practitioners like nurse practitioners and physician's assistants to physicians as the only prescribers under this program. By the way, doctors have been our biggest problem. They have fought us every step of the way.
Because they're not signing up, or because they don't
They're
believe
not
in
signing
cannabis?
up,
Or?
but they're not signing up. They don't believe in it. Those doctors who do believe in it have been taking advantage financially of patients in spite of being warned not to do so.
What do you mean?
So if you're a doctor in New York State and your patient comes to you and they have a qualifying condition, you're not supposed to charge them cash for this visit or for signing up for the program. We've sent them out, more than once, we've sent out notifications to physicians that if patients have insurance, you are to charge the insurance for the visit. You can't charge them for the medical marijuana. But they're still abusing this, and patients are desperate in this state. You know, they want access to treatment that they think will provide, relief to them, and so they're paying money out of their own pocket. So this is a constant battle with them. So we expanded the number of practitioners to include physicians, assistants, and nurse practitioners. That's helped relieve that problem. But it's a work in progress on a daily basis.
In terms of working with the governor, especially as we're about to do that once more with the budget process in a couple weeks, you mentioned that you wanted to not have perfect be the enemy of the good. Do you think that engaging with him on his terms was the right decision, or do you think that it might have been, looking back, do you think it might have been better to hold out?
I'm a pragmatic legislator. And again, it's better to have the door open and improve than to keep the door closed and hope for the best. So now here we are, 5 years later. Now the governor has decided that not only does he believe in medical cannabis, he believes in an adult use market. Oh, and hemp. So as you pointed out, we've finally passed the hemp bill. And now what we're facing, though, is if we're not like New Jersey. We are not like Colorado. We're not California. We're not other states. We are a strict representative democracy, which means these things have to be decided by the legislature.
Are you saying you're not excited for my constitutional convention in 20 years?
It's not happening. There's too many things at risk for a constitutional
Who
convention
knows
in
esoteric New York State politics law?
We defeated one just 2 years ago.
Yeah, I know.
But we're not in an initiative and referendum state, so we can't put this thing up for a public vote. If we did, we could pass it tomorrow. So it has to go through the legislative process. And so last year we had an opportunity where the governor put forward a very comprehensive bill on adult use, expansion of medical, and a hemp industry. And it failed in the budget process. We're one of the few states where you can take policy issues and put them into the spending plan, and it's kind of like using the carrot and the stick approach. If you vote against this, you have to vote against healthcare and education and other issues, right? We try and do those things, and every now and then the governor, any governor, whether it's Cuomo or his predecessors, will take complex public policy issues and stick them in the spending plan in an effort to get recalcitrant legislators to do those things. So he took what was really, in my opinion, one of the best marijuana, proposals and put it in the budget process, and it still failed because we had a lot of members, particularly in the suburbs, Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Orange and Rockland counties. They're very iffy on marijuana, expanding it to allow for adult use marijuana, and those members wouldn't vote for it, so we had to push it out of the budget. We had a narrow window at the end of the legislative cycle to kind of put it back in, but we ran into the same problem. So I'm not sure. Can we get it done again in this budget process? Maybe. So the governor's going to do it again. He's already indicated he's going to take many of the same issues, put it in the budget, and we're going to try and force members to vote for it because it's going to be attached to other things that they like. I think maybe we have a window of opportunity, and that window of opportunity is the vaping crisis. It's something that we weren't aware of last year, so we're seeing people become affected physically because of the purchase of vaporizing marijuana and even tobacco that they're buying in the black market. And so that should be, I think, a catalyst for us to create a legal regulated market where we test the product, we know where it came from, and we know what people are using. Because nobody who has become sick or has certainly died purchased a legal regulated product anywhere in this country. It is all coming out of the black market.
Do you think that the vaping crisis was the catalyst for Cuomo to flip?
I
Or do
think
you
so.
think there was
I
something
think
else?
so. The question
It
is,
seems
was
like
it is it enough for some of my colleagues who were opposed to it to flip? So what we heard at the end, you were there. I convinced you last year at the end of session. I said, talking to people like us in this room doesn't really move the bill, doesn't move issues. You need to be in Albany. You need to talk to people like me. We're the ones who are going to make the decision about whether we have legal regulated marijuana in New York State. So you need to, come to Albany or find a way to
And
contact.
I'm super lazy.
Right.
Super lazy, but I still went to Albany.
He did, and he spent 3 days nonstop in the Senate, outside the Senate chamber in the Senate lobby, trying to.
And then I came back for CannaGather, and then I got a bus the
back
next
again.
day.
But how do you convince members who are concerned about the issues that they think are important? So, what did we find out at the end of session? What was blocking the bill? The concern was traffic safety, and many of the various towns and villages around the state raised the issue that how would they deal with people driving under the influence? And my answer is always the same way you deal with it now. It's not like people in New York State don't smoke marijuana. Right? They act as if it doesn't happen right now. So how do they deal with driving under the influence now? It's the same way they always have. If they pull you over, it's because you have exhibited in some way, shape, or form that you are violating vehicle and traffic law, right? It doesn't matter. But it doesn't. It was an argument that many of my colleagues would make over and over that, well, what do we do about people who are smoking pot and driving? Well, they're doing that now. What do we do with that now? But many of the towns and villages said, well, we need something, right? So what they really want is money. They all want toys. They want more money for traffic and enforcement issues, and then there's these drug recognition experts. I don't know what the hell that means, but by the way, right, the DREs.
In Colorado,
we want some of those.
In Colorado, it's amazing. I don't know how they do this, but this is what the DA's office claims. They basically go to school for like a little bit, and then by the end of it, if they pull someone over, they can discern between like 12 different drugs which drug you're on, which is amazing because like I didn't even know that there are like 12 drugs.
It's all nonsense.
What was that? It
It's
could
all
be nonsense, but I'd
It's
kind of like to
totally
see it. I'd
nonsense.
like to give people 12 different drugs and sort of,
It's
do a
totally-
closed circuit safe
She's right,
test.
though. It's total nonsense. But what it means is additional revenue for each county, each town, each village, each municipality, whatever it happens to be. But that becomes the bigger problem. So there seems to be this belief that there's going to be huge amounts of money off of the legalization of adult use marijuana. And because everyone's looking at the first state that did it. So when you look at Colorado, which is, give or take, the first state that did it, Colorado's revenue went through the roof because people came from all over the country to go to Colorado. And then California went legal.
And by the
then
way,
Washington.
that's
and
the
then Oregon.
hospitalizations.
And then Nevada. And all, but not only, every time a state does it, it decreases the revenue that the next state does. So you have Massachusetts now that has an illegal adult use market. You know how many people from New York go to Massachusetts? Thank you.
Apparently we have people
And so
here.
every time you add a state, that decreases the revenue that the next state can derive from. Because I'm not going to spend a weekend in Massachusetts if I can stay in New York. I'm not going to Connecticut if I can stay in New York. So we're not going to derive the same amount of revenue at every state did. Will it be a lot? Yes, but not as much as people think. So all of the localities then go, well, you know what? If you want us to agree to support this, we need a piece of the revenue. And if you keep jacking up the tax revenue that you're going to derive from it, you decrease the likelihood that people are going to purchase from the legal market. I'm just going to go out into the black market. I'm going to continue. That's what we're seeing in California, and we're seeing in some of the other states that have gone legal. So you have to balance the tax revenue. You have to create a legal regulated market that makes sense. Otherwise, you're just going to continue what we already have in place, which doesn't help any of the states.
Yeah, and you actually sort of brought up the point that I was going to make, and I was actually having a very productive conversation with the Nassau County Legislature, who are Republican, and we were having a good chat, and I was explaining to them that, you know, the challenge, you guys are all afraid that, you know, the cannabis industry is going to come in and start switching people to cannabis, and like little Johnny is going to get hooked on cannabis, and that's going to be, and that's your worry. But like, what was that? He already might be hooked up, or he's not. But the youth consumption is a separate conversation. But
Until it becomes illegal, and then little Johnny doesn't want it anymore.
Yeah,
That's a bizarre thing we've seen in other states.
My point was that I don't not consume because it's illegal. I don't consume because I don't feel like it. If I wanted to consume, I could. The challenge, both in terms of legalization and revenue, is not how do we expand the size of the market, it's how do you integrate and how do you balance the gray market. And that, I think, is a challenge that is very, very complicated. As you said, in California, you're at like 80% of the market is still gray market. Do you have any suggestions or insight, or from a policy standpoint or otherwise, as to how New York could and should integrate the gray market?
Well, so one of the big challenges in the governor's proposal, and that was also what they call the MRTA, which is the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, was how do we create opportunities for people at various entry levels into the marketplace? There's a lot of criticism about the medical program, that it's you know, it's too white and too male, that it's the vertically integrated model prevents people from getting into the industry, that there's too many barriers to entry. And there could be truth to all of those things. So how do we reduce barriers to entry? Well, one of the biggest challenges has been vertical integration. And so why do you do vertically integrated? In the medical program there was this belief that it was easier for people to get into and maintain a license and retain that license. There's also this misinterpretation that people in the medical industry in New York, I can't talk about any other state, are making a lot of money. Nobody in the medical program is making any money. There's just not. There's no money to be made yet because of the restrictions that are placed on it by the State Department of Health. But if you want to create access to entry points into the marketplace, you have to reduce them by, one, breaking the vertical integration model. We should have dispensary-only, licenses. We should have distributor licenses. We should have delivery licenses. We should figure out how do people get into the industry at various points at the lowest level possible, and then how do we create, access to capital for them. The biggest problem for the industry has been access to capital and credit. And then once you have a license, how do you hold that license? When you have a license where the federal government says everything you're doing is illegal, how do you maintain your cash flow, your liquidity? It's very complicated, and the state has not helped in that process. Our restrictions on who you can sell to, where you can sell, where you're allowed to open your doors to, has only increased the problems for any of these industries.
And so that's completely spot on. And then in terms of as you said, it's super white, right? Like every RO is white, as far as I can tell. And then you have Etain is the only. I think we have some. Do we have some Etainers in the audience? Is Martha here? We got Etain in the audience.
But then at the same time, when we issued the RFP for the first 5 licenses, there were 43 applicants. There was only one, besides Etain, which is a women-owned industry, there was only one minority applicant. Only one.
I think one of the challenges is, as you said, is the capital hurdle. Is that it's sort of,
right.
if you worked at an investment, not to speak pejoratively of certain individuals, but it's like if you worked at an investment bank, you have larger access to capital to fund those operations. And if you don't have that sort of capital, that's sort of why you can't afford. Even I think what was the application fee for the medical? Was it like $250?
Yeah. $250.
Like, I don't have $250 to like throw down on.
But again,
CannaGather Capital doesn't have $250K to throw down.
The medical license was a vertically integrated license, which means you have to grow, sell, manufacture, produce, distribute. It's a very high hurdle.
Exactly.
Once you get into it, it's a very high hurdle to maintain. So if you eliminate it, why do I have to grow it if I just want to sell it? Why do I have to sell it if I only want to produce it? Why do I have to do this if I only want to do that? So that's where, if we're going to move forward on adult use, we cannot have that vertically integrated model. There are a lot of talented people out there, but they don't need to do everything in this chain.
Completely agree. And so I guess I think that just by virtue of balkanizing the different licenses into retail, transport, cultivation, et cetera, you'll be able to lower the barrier to entry.
Right.
But I guess how do we actively enfranchise communities of color that have been adversely affected by
Well,
the
there's
failed
got
war
to
on
be a
drugs?
capital pool, either through the license fee that the state collects and that can put into money, but there has to be a capital pool. We've already experienced this on the legal side of the business industry. Forget about marijuana. The state has the state of New York and the city of New York both have a stated goal that when it comes to contracts that they solicit and that they put out, that you have to have a 30% MWBE component. The city and the state have never, ever been able to meet that. And it's not because they haven't tried, it's just that for many of the MWBE contractors out there, whether they be in the construction industry, the retail industry, it doesn't matter what they're in, they don't have the same access to capital and credit that other people do. So we have to figure that one out. How do we create a pool of capital so that we can help level the playing field for people who are interested in this industry but don't have rich friends? You know, we don't all have access to, hedge fund operators. I don't know any hedge fund operators. Do you?
Got any
guys,
hedge fund
right?
operators
Any
in here?
there?
I think we do, yeah.
Right? There's a couple of you.
We have
Most
at least
people,
two.
most startups don't know that, and we see the same challenges in the construction industry, in the nonprofit field for MWBEs. They don't have access to capital and credit.
And so I think that there was a lot of talk about that pool of money in the context of social equity, about why New York State failed, and based on what I've heard from you and other people, that wasn't the main reason why it failed, although I kind of wish that it were, because then it would sort of make social equity that much more important. But that being said, the question of CRTA, the governor's bill, versus the MRTA, sort of, and we talked about this with Senator Kruger, is the executive wants the power of the purse and the legislature wants the power of the purse. And so now that we go back into the budget session, Governor Cuomo is in control. Do you think that we're going to see the governor have the purse strings, and can we trust him to?
I think you're going to see a bit of the same fight this time, but at the end of the day, there's not as much money as people think. There really isn't. And a lot of it is derived from tax revenue. And I keep trying to warn my colleagues, if you tax this product too highly, you will drive people to either other states that are close by and legal, or right back into the same black market that you're trying to eradicate. So you have to be careful. If we haven't learned that from tobacco, I don't know what we will. You cannot overtax it. If you overtax it, you're just going to drive it right. You're going to drive legitimate small business owners right out of business.
So I have one more question for you, but let's open up to the audience before I ask it, because I just
and
want.
by the way, if you haven't looked at the problem, take a look at Canada. Yesterday, the New York Times had a big piece on the Canadian market is collapsing. So people should look at other entities, and then learn from that. Look at Oregon, look at California, look at Washington State. We have to be careful the number of licenses we issue, the tax policies that we put in place. Otherwise, you're not going to derive the revenue you want, and you're not going to eradicate the black market, which is what if we're going to create a legal regulated market, it should be so that people feel safe walking into a dispensary. They don't have to go into the black market or the gray market or whatever you want to call it. If we don't do that, we're not going to eradicate any of that.
Or integrated or some
integrated,
fashion, yeah.
right.
Makes sense. We got any questions from the audience right there, hedge fund?
Yeah, my question is isn't every industry the same problem that everybody has when it comes to minorities and trying to get into business? Doesn't have to necessarily be in cannabis,
Right.
But it's in every
You want
single.
access to capital and credit.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, it's like I basically had to fund my CBD company from my 401k and my life savings, and I haven't had any banks come to me and give me the opportunity. I just have to risk everything that I have in order to make it happen.
You're absolutely right. So we see that continuously with what we call minority and women-owned businesses who don't have the same access to capital that other entities do. And why is that? for a lot, you made the point that you went into your own retirement savings first. We saw that with Etain, which is one of the few license holders. They're a women-owned business. They use their own capital and their own credit. I don't know how we break down those barriers so that banks are willing to lend to people that don't have the same type of financial portfolio that others do. It's a challenge. I chaired the banking committee in the Senate for a couple of years. It was a big issue. We would hold hearings, and the banks would come in and swear that they would do better. But at the end of the day, their business is about allocating money to people that have great credit or the ability to repay that money. The question is, how do we as government help strengthen your ability to remain in business and stay? So let's just go back to the construction industry. If you're an MWBE construction company in New York and we have a stated goal, 30% of our contracts is supposed to go to you, right? That's our big challenge. You've managed to get yourself a contract, either with the state, with the Department of Transportation, a city agency, or the big one of all, the MTA. The worst payers in the industry is government. So you might be at the tail end of this contract. You're a subcontractor to a GC. A GC's got a big contract with the state of New York through the MTA, and the state doesn't pay the MTA doesn't pay the GC doesn't pay you. Who's on the hook at the end? You, right? So you don't make payroll 2 or 3 months out of a year. You're now decertified. And you are the weakest link in this chain. But who was responsible? The state. So how do we fix this? I've worked on this for a few years now, and I cannot get the state to be a better payer, and that's the big challenge. So we have the same problem in medical marijuana. Medical or adult use marijuana. So you have banks who turn around and say, you're the weak link and we're not going to give you money. And unfortunately, then we wind up with the same industry that you're complaining about, which is, this industry with people at the top who have a lot of money and a lot of capital.
Yeah, I think there's...
It's not fair. I'm just...
No, I get it, but isn't your providers including the state?
The point was that by law, every industry should force its payers to pay its consultants. I think there's sort of 3 quick comments that I want to make in response to, one's not so quick, in response to you. One is that at a state level, I think the point that you made about reserving allocation of capital for appropriations to social equity is key, and it hasn't really been done in, I think, any other state, and that's to start. Federally, to your point, beyond New York State, we need safe banking. You can sort of go both ways in terms of the social equity side of things, and in discussion with one senator's office, trying to argue more in favor of people of color, even though he is a person of color, so it sort of complicates things. But I think that federally we've seen historical discrimination against people of color for access to financial services. And then why cannabis, why social equity is so important in the context of cannabis is because of the history of cannabis, is because of the failed war on drugs. Is if you look at the industry stems from that failed war on drugs, which is a war on people of color. And so if you think about why social equity is so important, it's because we've sort of attacked these communities under the auspices of this plant and said, hey, we're going to throw you in jail because of this plant. We're going to destroy, think about all the extrapolated effects and secondary effects of putting someone in jail, ravage these communities, and now we're going to go and we're going to whitewash this gray market industry with a bunch of white people. So those people that come out of jail now can't really fully enter the workforce because they have a record, and so many of them are street pharmacists. And so we're going to take away those jobs. So the cannabis industry has an obligation more than any other industry. Maybe
I believe the government has an obligation.
Everyone
the industry doesn't.
Everyone involved in everything
Because
has
the
an
industry
obligation.
still is largely living, in between these two worlds. The federal government says you're illegal. The state government that you're in says you're legal. It's the government that committed the war on drugs. It wasn't the industry. The industry's grown out of this new interpretation of what we should do on the state level. And most of them are not yet making money, but there are, at the rate we're going to wind up with 5 or 6 large companies controlling the industry because everybody else who gets into it, like this gentleman here, is going to go under.
Well, to your point, it's hard to give back when you're not making money. So
You're seeing it over and over. We had 5 original license holders in New York State in the medical program. Only 2 of them are still standing. The rest of them have been taken over. They've been bought out by other people. And we're seeing this purchasing over and over by large companies because nobody else can sustain themselves in this industry.
yeah, I can't really see the questions other than John.
I can't explain.
The question
I can
is,
only
what is
explain-
Governor Cuomo doing
What is Governor Cuomo doing? I'm not sure.
with the other states, with their
So-
regional?
I'm gonna speculate because he didn't sit down and talk to me. The few times he talks to me about this stuff, it usually doesn't go very well. But I think he was capitalizing on a couple of things. One was the vaping crisis, right? So we're seeing people who are purchasing vaporizing products, whether they be tobacco or nicotine or marijuana use, and they're getting sick and they're dying. Right? And it's not just in New York, it's happening everywhere because we have a largely unregulated market. And by the way, if you're in New York State and you want to buy marijuana, it's not that hard to get what the look-alike products. They look like medical marijuana. They deliver it to your house, and it says it's medical grade, and you get vaporizing pens and the whole bit. So I think he was reacting to that. He bought into the idea last year that we need to move to a legal regulated market. He put forward a pretty comprehensive bill in the budget. I'm not sure how much of it was his idea as it was some of the people within his shop. He's got some pretty smart people on this policy. Axel Burnaby, who works in the Department of Health, is brilliant on this issue, and some other people. But I think he figured that, okay, if we're going to have this problem in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, maybe if we had a regional approach. So one of the problems for a state like New York, we're seeing we lag behind. Massachusetts went forward. If you go to Great Barrington in Massachusetts, you go to the dispensaries that are there, pull into their parking lot, half of the cars there have New York license plates, right? So we know New Yorkers are going to Massachusetts to buy legal regulated marijuana. We know they're going to other states to buy it. Maybe if we have a regional approach. Again, I'm speculating on what his thought process is, that might help move members who are opposed to it to come up with a comprehensive solution. There's some value to that, I think. Right? So you just look at the medical program. We now have 35 states. 35?
There's so many I can't count.
Right,
that
35 states plus the District of Columbia that have medical marijuana. That means you have 35 different sets of rules and regulations for doctors, for patients, for the industry. It's insane. It's ridiculous. In a world like this, you should have a federal program. We don't need 50 state solutions on marijuana. We need a 50-state solution, but we are not going to get this Washington, not this Congress, to do a damn thing on this issue any more than anything else. They're just not going to do it. So it's just, if we can come up with 5 states around us that mirror each other, maybe that's an approach that will begin to push. So I think that's what he was doing, and that's the plan. But again, each state does their own thing. So New Jersey was part of the process, and now they've moved forward and said they're going to do it through a public referendum.
So one more question.
Right? And yes.
How
No,
much?
it does.
How much does the opioid crisis
But they don't
impact the
see it
governor?
the same way.
They don't see that
No.
assists in the transition and the
They
legalization of opiate.
They see it as a gateway drug.
Some do and some don't. And the
Not all.
problem with that is I've said this earlier before. Doctors have been our biggest challenge in this. So you have, when I got involved in this issue, I said it very clearly that it wasn't just about people who had cancer, who were suffering from chemotherapy and needed medical marijuana to stimulate their appetite. That there were people who were involved in this process, some of whom were not going to be with me when the bill was finally signed. Some people who were going to live with chronic and severe pain their entire life. That's how they got hooked on opioids. Why? Because they went to a doctor because they had severe or chronic pain, whether it was as a result of an injury or an illness.
Yes, and the Sacco family is.
And that was going to be with them forever. And so if you took them off of opioids, they still needed something to deal with that pain.
So why is it the upstate people don't get it?
Because they still don't make the connection. You know, I have a lot of colleagues who still don't understand that addiction is not a character defect, that it's an actual disease.
So the question was, do you think that the responsibility for social equity and integrating the POC and formerly convicted population is solely the responsibility of government, or does the industry also bear some responsibility?
I think since the industry is the only one in place, that we can incentivize them to address some of those issues through employment opportunities, economic opportunities to help level that playing field. But again, at the end of the day, it's the government that committed the war on drugs. It wasn't the industry people who managed to get themselves a license. But can we require through the licensing process expanding opportunities? Yes, that we can do.
Question here, Kevin.
Right,
The
but
question-
that's exactly how you do
The
it.
question was, should there be tax breaks for MWBs?
Or not a tax breaks, but necessarily a requirement for the continuation of your license. So, the original five license holders in New York, which just had to recertify their licenses. One of the conditions that the State Department of Health placed on them was exactly that issue. How do you integrate your workforce? How do you make sure that people who have been victims of the war on drugs, who have either had low-level offenses or have been convicted of prior drug conditions, are allowed to work in your industry? You have to show that you're doing everything you can to increase the diversity in your workforce to address those issues. It shouldn't be.
Question is, what's the deal with adult use, the decoupling of
Right.
or coupling of adult use and medical?
It shouldn't be, but it has been used as a political pawn. So the expansion of the medical program, which everyone agrees on, there's no objection in the legislature. Democrat, Republican, both houses, everyone believes that we need to do more to expand it, to eliminate, the problems of access to coverage, work on insurance coverage. Everybody agrees on that. It has been held hostage to the adult use, and that's largely because of the advocates who say, well, they moved on medical, then everyone will say, well, we don't need to do anything on adult use. It pisses me off royally. And because we don't hear enough from patients anymore,
How do we as patients really make that?
you need to let your legislators know, and so you're going to use CannaGather, that the expansion of the medical program is critically important. Patients are sick, they are harmed, and as I say, they travel too far, they pay too much, and they are waiting too long. And it should not be held hostage to the determination about whether we do adult use in this state.
And I don't want to go to another state.
And you shouldn't have to. And by the way,
I want to, I shouldn't have to, I live here.
if you do,
Be here.
patients who are registered patients in this state who purchase marijuana outside the program are violating not just New York state law, but public
Federal
health law. That is a felony. So you need to tell whoever your elected official is, their refusal to help you right now puts you at risk of committing a felony.
So I guess the question that I was saving is, what can the people in this room do to help you with the medical program going forward, and then also with the adult use bill
We just
in
need to
2020?
remind people that medical should not be held hostage to adult use. It just shouldn't. It just should not be held hostage to adult use.
You wouldn't have the program you have now. She obviously cares, right? It takes 30 pills a day.
Not she.
No, but my colleagues don't really make the connection. You just have to. I will tell you, I've been a legislator for a long time, and once you get elected, you know what you know. Whatever propelled you to run for office, you know everything about that issue. Most elected officials are not that smart. They really aren't. And I'm going to be honest with you. They know what they know.
And they don't want to know anything else.
But the only way they learn is if they're willing to talk to people outside their comfort zone.
And so what do you?
And so you got to talk to them, and you have to say, listen, I appreciate all the things you do for me on this issue, I don't know, whatever it happens to be, but you need to understand this issue that affects me personally. They're not that smart. You got to educate them. It's the truth. You don't even have to threaten them. Just say, listen, you're my elected official. You have to understand what affects me personally. So, but what about Bill Larkin? So so the reason this bill passed the first time was because I had an 82-year-old colleague. His name was Senator Bill Larkin. He passed away this year at the age of 90. He was a retired Army colonel. He was a rock rib Republican. He was a very storied individual. When he was a colonel in the Army, he led Martin Luther King across the bridge in Selma. He was the most amazing man. He believed in medical marijuana. Nobody else did. The Republicans were totally opposed to it. But he believed in it. He was my deciding vote in the Senate Health Committee. He was the reason I got it out of the Finance Committee and on the floor, and it passed. So you never know when you're talking to people what they believe in and what they don't believe in. But you got to talk to them. Most of my colleagues, they believe in medical. And what you just have to say to them is, I know you may not agree on adult use. I get that. But I need you to help me on this issue. So if you're a medical patient, you just got to tell them that. If you're an adult use supporter, you should advocate for that as well and talk to them about why we need a legal regulated market in New York State. A legal regulated market is the way you get rid of the illegal market that they are so afraid of. Legal regulated market. Not overtaxed, legal regulated market. That's what we need.
Senator Diane Savino.
Thank you, everybody. Happy holidays, everyone. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Festivus for those of us who are annoyed all the time.
Thank you for everything that you do for all of us and everything that you have done, that you continue to do, and you will probably continue to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Josh. And thank you for what you do.